Chapter 12. Answers. Daniel Henson, Lydia breathed. It wasn't. It couldn't be her brother. Lydia closed her eyes tight and fought against the panic that rose within her like a tidal wave. Lydia, are you all right? My brother's name is Daniel Henson, Lydia said weakly. Your brother? Fran was appalled. Yeah, he's 10. Lydia's voice trembled. There was a deathly silence. Then Fran started to giggle. For a moment now I thought, well, never mind what I thought. Imagine thinking the tyrant is your brother. The tyrant is pushing 50 and you're, what, 12? Lydia nodded. The same age as me, Fran said, but Lydia hardly heard her. A possible explanation for what was happening crept into her mind, but she shook her head. It was too bizarre, too ridiculous to be true. It couldn't be. But the thought refused to leave her. Lydia had a new question now. Not where was she, but when? What's he like, Daniel Henson? Lydia forced herself to ask. Fran's smile vanished. He's old and ugly and mean. He's been the ruler of this town since before I was born. Lydia stared at Fran until her eyes started to hurt. Her eyelids started to hurt, and her eyes began to ache. What year is this? Lydia whispered. You should know that. You're the same age as me. Can't you count? Fran's eyes narrowed. Look, Lydia, you're worrying me. Maybe I should call my dad. No, don't. Lydia looked around quickly. I need to sit down. Lydia walked over to the bottom step and sat down before Fran could stop her. Closing her eyes, she pinched her left forearm. She clicked her heels together again and again. Then she opened her eyes slowly. She wasn't lying in her own bed. She wasn't even back in Tarwich. The wallpaper surrounding her was still a brilliant burning yellow. Was this all real? Was Lydia really in the future? It was impossible, ludicrous, and yet here she was. Fran stood in front of Lydia, a bewildered look on her face. Fran, could you touch that wallpaper, please? Lydia asked. Fran walked over to the wall and did as she was asked. Jets of maroon and burgundy spread outwards from her hands. What do those colours mean? Asked Lydia. Confusion, Fran smiled dryly. And you're the one confusing me. Lydia looked around. When she'd first arrived at the house, she'd only really noticed the things that were the same as in her time. Now she could see the things that were different. The strange-shaped light bulbs dotted around the ceiling, but no light switches anywhere that Lydia could see. The view screen, the tracker mobiles, the peculiar wallpaper, even the strange papery shirt that Lydia was wearing. Lydia took the bottom of her shirt in both hands and tried to tear it. It was like trying to tear a pair of thick tights. The future. Lydia still couldn't believe it, and yet here she was. It had to be true. What other explanation was there? I can't be dreaming. Surely I'd have woken up by now if I was dreaming, Lydia thought. How do you switch your lights on? She asked, looking up at the light bulbs decorating the ceiling. Hall lights on, Fran said, puzzled. Immediately, every hall light came on. And to turn them off? Lydia asked. Hall lights off, Fran frowned. Is this some kind of joke? Lydia shook her head. A joke, if only it was. Then Lydia remembered something her mum always said whenever she and Danny hadn't tidied up their rooms. Who cleans the house? Lydia asked. Is that you and your dad? Fran's frown deepened. Our house robot, of course. It's only a model GH1042A, so it's really slow, but it gets the job done eventually. Mum was always saying, if you two are waiting for someone to clean your rooms for you, you'll have to wait until sometime in the 25th century when housework robots are available. Until then, get to it. So Mum was right. Housework robots were coming, and sooner than she thought. The tyrant won't allow anyone he doesn't absolutely trust to have any robot that's more advanced than the model GH1042A, Fran said bitterly. He's probably afraid we'll reprogram them or something and send the robots after him. Lydia walked over to the heavy curtain, which hung from ceiling to floor before the front door. She pulled it aside. The front door wasn't made of wood. It was made of steel. How'd you get in and out? Lydia asked Fran. There's a keypad outside and a control switch inside, Fran frowned. So you don't need a key. A key for what? Doesn't matter. Lydia let the curtain fall over the door again. She looked up. Sprinklers had been placed at regular intervals along the ceiling. All of the downstairs wallpaper was covered with in a mass of pink and burgundy swirls now. What are you doing? Fran asked curiously. I'm not asleep. I'm not dreaming all this, am I? Lydia said slowly. All the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. Lydia swallowed hard. Somehow the storm on the moors must have pitched her forward in time, decades into the future. It was impossible, and yet here she was. And the searing ache of her arm was too painful to be anything but real. And Daniel Henson, was he really her brother, or was it just a coincidence? Daniel Henson was a common enough name. It couldn't be her brother. He'd never do all the bad things that everyone was talking about. He would never do anything to be so hated. Never. But what if it was her brother? Then something else occurred to Lydia. Fran, what was your mum's maiden name? Her full name? Frances Weldon. I was named after her. I wish Mum and Dad had picked something else. I really hate the name Frances, she grumbled. Frankie. So Fran was related to Frankie after all. Frankie was Fran's mother. That meant that Frankie was all right. She'd survived the accident and woken up. She'd even grown up and had a daughter. Lydia's smile faded. Fran said that her mum had died when she was a lot younger, killed by the night guards. Lydia wanted to cry because she wasn't sure how she felt. Relief that Frankie had survived her accident in the past, but then what? To be killed so violently, so horribly. Maybe after the accident, she and Frankie had made up. Maybe the truth had come out about the sports cup. Maybe, hopefully, they'd become better friends than ever before. I really am in the future, Lydia realised. What did you say? Fran asked. Lydia stood up slowly. She had a problem. She needed help desperately. But could she trust Fran? Would Fran turn her back on her just as Frankie had done? Even now, a flare of the old burning bitterness swept through Lydia's body. Just as quickly, it died. She had a more urgent problem now. How was she going to get back to her own time? Beside that, every other problem was minuscule. With a sigh, Lydia realised that she didn't have any choice. She needed Fran's help. Fran, I need to talk to you. Just at that moment, Fran's dad emerged from the basement. Fran, what's she doing down here? He frowned. Lydia was thirsty, Dad. We just came downstairs for a drink, Fran replied quickly. Well, get your drink and go back upstairs, said Fran's dad. I've already had it. We were just on our way upstairs again, Lydia said. Is your meeting over then, Fran? Fran asked her father. He nodded before turning to Lydia. Come here, he beckoned. After a brief nod from Fran, Lydia did as she was told. With reluctant steps, she made her way over to Fran's dad. Let's see your arm. Fran pushed up the left sleeve of her shirt. Fran's dad carefully removed the bandage. Then Lydia saw her wound for the first time. It was S-shaped and looked like a snake weaving its way up her arm. Placed at regular intervals along the wound were the grey plastic staples which Fran had told her about. Lydia lifted her arm and bent her head for a closer look, but she didn't get it. Fran's dad reapplied the bandage, thwarting her attempt. It's just as well you were with Fran when the night guards shot you, Fran's dad growled. Any longer, and your arm could have been seriously infected. I thought you thought I was a spy, Lydia reminded him. I said you were lucky. I didn't say we were, Fran's dad sniffed. Now keep that sterile dressing on for at least 2 days. Yes, Mr. Weldon, Lydia said. The name is Mr. Lucas. Sean Lucas, not Weldon, said Fran's dad. That was my wife's name. Sorry, Lydia murmured. Lucas, Sean Lucas. Lydia stared at the man before her. Frankie married you, she grinned with delight. Just wait till she told Frankie that she was going to marry Sean Lucas. It was only when she saw the deepening frown on Fran's dad's face that Lydia realised what she had said. Sorry, Lydia began. I didn't mean... Never mind, Fran's dad shook his head. No doubt the pain in your arm is affecting your mind. He straightened and bent her arm, gently turning it first this way, then that. Sean Lucas. He was the first one who'd called her a thief. Your arm will be fine, said Fran's dad. Thank you. Lydia pulled her arm out of his grasp. Mr. Lucas frowned suddenly, leaning closer to Lydia. You look kind of familiar. Have I seen you before? No, you haven't, Lydia denied, flustered. I'm new here. Fran tugged at Lydia's sleeve. You said you wanted to talk to me, she interrupted. Lydia nodded and quickly ran upstairs ahead of Fran. She was aware Fran's dad standing at the bottom of the steps, his eyes boring into her back. They entered Fran's bedroom, and Lydia closed the door carefully behind her. Fran, the weirdest thing of my entire life has just happened to me. At Fran's puzzled look, Lydia broke off. What's the matter? Fran asked. Fran, Lydia began slowly, I need to see Daniel Henson. Are you nuts? What on earth do you want to see him for? Fran asked, appalled. I can't explain, but I have to see him. Can you get me into his mansion? Don't you understand? If you go in there, you'll never come out again. I'll risk it. Why? I can't tell you. Not yet, at any rate. Fran scrutinised Lydia. You're serious, aren't you? Lydia nodded. I'm not going to help you unless you tell me why, Fran said stubbornly. Anxiously, Lydia chewed her bottom lip. This was it. What should she do? Fran, I'm 12 years old, but I was born over 50 years ago, Lydia said slowly. Silence. I don't understand, Fran said at last. Carefully picking her way through the words, Lydia explained what had happened from the time she got on the bus which took her to the moors. She couldn't bring herself to talk about the sports cup being found in her locker and her classmates calling her a thief. That wound was still too raw, too painful to expose. So I woke up on the moors and the ground was bone dry. The rest you know, Lydia finished. You're from the past, said Fran slowly. Look, if someone told me this story, I wouldn't know what to think either, Lydia said. I'm finding it hard to believe as well. And it has actually happened to me. Fran grinned suddenly. This is a wind-up, right? Where are you really from? I've told you. You've got to believe me. Fran's scepticism was obvious. What can I do to prove it? Lydia pleaded. Turn around. Let me see your ID implant, Fran ordered. My what? Your identity implant, Fran said impatiently. Lydia turned around. What's one of those? She frowned. Fran carefully examined Lydia's nape from the bottom of her hairline to where the back of her neck joined her shoulders. You don't have one, Fran whispered, astounded. Lydia turned around. What are these implants? The moment anyone's born, they get an ID implant put into the back of their neck. They're tiny computer chips that look a bit like old-fashioned buttons. The implants tell who you are, who your parents are, date of birth, and other stuff that they call classified. Fran finished with a scathing snort. But why? What are they for? They're meant to be the way of knowing who everyone is, especially those who move around a lot. The leaders of every town have implant readers, so you can't lie about your identity. And then, of course, they can call up your file and get your full background and history. We don't have those in my time, Lydia shuddered with relief. What a horrific idea, having a computer chip installed in your head from the moment you're born. They started using implants in this country years ago, Fran said slowly. She turned Lydia around and examined her nape again. Everyone who's 24 or under definitely has one, and most people over that age too, unless they've gone underground. Of course, you could have had yours surgically removed, but then there'd be a scar. You don't even have a scar. That's because I'm not from your time? Do you believe me now? The two girls spent countless moments just watching each other. You're telling the truth, aren't you? Fran's voice was filled with wonder. How did it happen? How exactly did you get here? I don't know. I'm not sure, Lydia sighed. I'm here with you, but I don't belong here. I belong in the past, and I've got to get back. How are you going to do that? I don't know. That's why I have to see Daniel Henson. Lydia lowered her voice. But why? Fran stared at Lydia, her eyes getting wider and wider, as at last she realised what was on Lydia's mind. I think Daniel Henson is my brother, and if he is, he's the only one who can help me, Lydia said. How? He's the only one around here who knows what happened to me. If he's my brother, he can tell me what happens to me. He'll know how I got back to my own time, explained Lydia. If you got back, Fran said. If, Lydia agreed. Now, do you understand why I must see him?